Hey, what's up? Once again, it is time for the Inked Anarchist to drop some truth bombs for you. So, what I want to talk about today is actually kind of interesting. What just happened on the news today was that the historically pro gun state of Vermont has actually passed some serious liberal modern liberal, not classical liberal, gun control measures. So basically, it's think California style, right? So 10 round magazine limit in long guns, 15 rounds in pistols. They've raised the buying age to 21 for long guns in flying in the face flagrantly of what has historically been the case for the United States at 18. It also imposes a mandatory 3-day waiting period, not just for pistols, but also for long guns. And basically, this was passed by a left-wing legislature. Now, the governor is actually right-wing. He's a Republican. However, he recently shifted pretty massively to the left. And this was as a result of a teenager being arrested for allegedly planning on shooting up his school within days of the Florida shooting that everybody knows about. Now, this is something that is kind of mind-boggling to a lot of people because the NRA has given him like a 93% approval rating. Although if you know the NRA, that doesn't actually surprise you any because the NRA is also not very pro-gun these days and hasn't been for quite some time. Again, they sponsored the NFA, they sponsored the GCA. They are not pro-gun, and if you decided in light of all of the threats to our liberties in America to join the NRA, I got some really bad news for you on that front. But I find this incredibly interesting that there's been this rapid shift after all of these shootings, and of course everybody's celebrating David Hogg, that piece of crap. And his Sinead O'Connor wannabe troll thing assistant and whatnot. And this is a growing thing. We're seeing this huge shift. Also, in the news, was a couple has now been arrested from Texas for the first bump stock ban violation in Maryland. That news story is really bizarre. The guy's claiming that like he was on a secret mission for the government, which is odd. And that he needed the guns for that. Got bad news for you. Chances are pretty good that the government's probably going to give you better weapons than that and actually give them to you. If you are doing something for them. I would have a hunch, but I could be wrong. What's interesting to note about that though is that historically, this isn't the first time this has happened. Another black dude from Texas actually claimed the same thing after doing a big shooting. That was the DC Naval Yard. And before that, back in '02, the DC Sniper, for anyone who remembers that, with the guy that was sniping random people out of the trunk of his car, he also claimed as he was doing that he was on a secret government mission. Now, I'm not one for like major rampant conspiracy theories. However, I'm noticing a trend. I don't know if anybody else is or not, but I kind of am. And I find that kind of suspicious that that's kind of a thing that's building up. Additionally, it's interesting to note that the bump stock arrest happened because he had a camera on the outside of his hotel room, and that camera went out, so he actually called the police himself. Now, this lends credence to the fact that at least he believed he was on an operation for the government and was not going to be in any trouble. He actually called them because it went out. He was worried somebody was breaking in and that he had unsecured weaponry there. So very interesting, but it's the first actual arrest in light of this bump stock thing. Again, bump stocks, if you are unfamiliar with a bump stock, it's literally a piece of plastic with a spring in it that the gun mounts to with a single screw, and it just means that instead of you being able to secure the weapon to your shoulder as you fire, it bounces off of this spring so that it bounces forward after the recoil pushes it backward, so that it pushes the trigger against your finger and sets it off again. Now, while this simulates automatic fire, the weapon remains in fact semi-automatic, as a new pull of the trigger is required for every single shot, and even the NFA was okay with it. Badfee said that they were totally cool with their existence and everything else up until very recently. It's also important to note that if you do fire like that, you can totally do it without a bump stock, and it's also important to note, on top of all of that you're incredibly inaccurate as you do so. You're going to hit maybe the broadside of a barn if you're lucky. Your rounds are everywhere. That's the reason why precision weapons don't really use free-floated barrels, and why they tend not to use an open bolt system. There's a lot of other things that gun grabbers aren't going to get because they don't know anything about guns. Now, juxtaposed to this, you have autopsy findings in a recent police shooting case in Louisiana that directly contradict the story of the police officer who was just let off of the hook for it. So I find that incredibly interesting, and that's something that I bring up because I want to juxtapose that. Because when you say that you are for gun control, that doesn't mean that you're anti-gun. It means that you think that only the police and other government agents should be the ones with guns in their hands, because obviously you're not going to keep guns out of the hands of everybody else's hands without guns yourself. How else are you going to enforce that? And the only ones in gun control states that have guns are, in fact, the police, the military, and the agents of the state. Now, what's interesting is that the exact same people who tend to say that they know that the police are dangerous, that they understand that that is a massive risk and that you can't trust these people, they're also the ones who think they're the only people who should have the means to defend themselves. And I find that incredibly interesting. That's this weird psychological dissonance thing that's going on. And I think that's important to note. And I think that's something that, maybe should get brought up by anyone else who's willing to debate. Now, speaking of debate, I do also want to mention that multiple people, including people that I know, have now been swatted as a result of arguing pro-gun on Facebook against lefties. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term swatted, and that would probably mean that you've been on the internet like all of 3 days, but if you're unfamiliar with the term swatted, basically what it means is that somebody has made up a story to be able to call the police and have a SWAT team show up, kick in your door, and potentially shoot you. And this has now happened to at least 4 anarchists who have been arguing for gun rights and for gun laws, and for the danger of leaving guns in the hands of the very police, who then ultimately wound up kicking in their doors. And it's this new tactic that the left is now using because they can't win in legitimate, intelligent, logical, reasoned debate because their stance is untenable from a logical standpoint. Instead, what they're doing is they're trying to use the very agents of the state that they supposedly are so scared of and hate for murdering innocent people to try and get them to murder innocent people. So basically, they're encouraging the state to do exactly the thing that they're worried about the state doing. And again, this is another demonstration of the complete lack of logic or thought of any critical nature that the left demonstrates over and over and over again, where they are willing to use the state for violence and then decry the violence of the state at the same time, unless it's to their own ends. We have a word for wanting to use violence against people who disagree with you, to stop the people who disagree with you from being able to do the same things that you want to be able to do. You know what that word is? We call that fascism. And make no mistake, the Nazis were very for gun control. They didn't enact it the way a lot of conservatives in America try to portray it. It actually already kind of existed from the Weimar Republic. But it was expedient for them politically to keep it in place and to expand it, to use it against anarchists, against communists, against socialists, against those people that they felt were, Jews, obviously, that they felt were political adversaries. And they used it to a very large extent. For that. Now, what's interesting about that is it was initially enacted in large part because of their failed attempt at a coup, the putsch, that Hitler wound up landing Hitler in prison and things. That actually was part of that impetus, and then it comes back around, they suddenly now have power. So again, remember, you do not want a law on the books that you would not trust your worst enemy with, because make no mistake, historically, it's proven over and over again, they will use those laws against you once they get power. And we even saw that just recently in America with the left celebrating Obama basically ruling by the stroke of a pen. And then now Trump takes power and Trump starts doing it against the left. And suddenly the left is all of a sudden all about the balance of powers again. And again, we're circling back around here to the lack of logic, the lack of critical thought, the lack of foresight, the complete lack of intelligence that it requires to be on the political left. You have to abandon all reason, all logical thought, all critical analysis of data, any respect for facts in order to wind up on the political left. And in order to wind up a socialist, in order to wind up a statist, you have to abandon logical reasoned thought. You simply do. That's a requirement, because if you maintain logical reasoned thought, you will not wind up there. You will wind up an anarchist. You'll wind up at the very least a libertarian or a minarchist, but ultimately a minarchist and an anarchist are really only separated by about 6 months. So anyway, that's my really quick, moderately quick thing that I wanted to throw out there. I'm sorry for my voice. I'm still recovering from like a plague level cold. Hopefully it's back again in a week or so. But anyway, I'll see you guys on the flip side.